Hello and welcome to In the Channel from channelbuzz.ca, bringing news and information to the Canadian IT channel for the last 16 years. I'm Robert Dutt, editor at channelbuzz.ca and your host for the show. We're continuing our series of conversations from Dell Technologies World in Las Vegas. This week, we're shifting from Dell executive perspective to the partner perspective, and today's guest has been making the trip to this event since the EMC World days. Earl Gosick is co-founder and senior consultant at ESTI Consulting Services, a Saskatoon-based solution provider that just celebrated 35 years in business and took home Dell's Data Center Solution Excellence Award for Canada last year. Earl also sits inside Dell's CTO Connect program, a small invitation-only group of partner technologists who get an early look at where Dell's roadmap is actually heading and, importantly, a real opportunity to push back on it. Earl's a storage specialist at his core, and that turned out to be a useful lens as a conference that was fundamentally about AI infrastructure. Because if you pull on that AI thread long enough, it leads you back to data, and data always leads you back to storage. We talked about what the exascale and rack scale announcements mean for real customer deployments, why the cyber resilience conversation is as much about recovery speed as backup integrity, and a genuinely interesting thread about why Saskatchewan and the broader Canadian Prairies may be sitting on one of the most underappreciated data center opportunities in North America right now. Let's get right into it. My chat with Earl Gosick. Earl, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me here. It's always nice to talk about what we're doing with Dell.
No doubt. And you guys are doing a lot. I understand this is by no means your first DTW rodeo.
No, I've been coming since the EMC World days, and I missed a year through COVID. That was about it.
Well, I guess we'll allow you that. So you've got this background here. You do the CTO Connect with Dell. What's different about this year, if anything? You know, what's the tone or the energy that tells you something about where the industry's at right now, and not necessarily just, where Dell would like it to be or to be going?
Well, I think the driving factor of today is really the supply constraints. You can see what AI is doing and the effect that's having across the board on every product that has memory or CPU or flash drives in it, which is everything in technology. So that's really setting the tone, but it also shows how effective AI has been as a market driver and what people think is going to come out of that technology, which is, I think, very important for people to understand. It's ubiquitous technology that's going to drive a lot of change in our industry, and we're seeing the leading edge of that. And if this is the leading edge, there's some pretty exciting things coming, I suspect, and it's going to do some pretty important and, probably quite wonderful things for our clients.
We heard from the main stage kind of the idea of encouraging customers to get their hand up early, to get those orders, or even an inkling of where things are going for orders in as early as possible, and that will in effect, Jeff Clark was suggesting, get folks the best possible results. What's the guidance you guys are providing your customers around that whole issue and thinking about availability and pricing of hardware and all that kind of stuff in this current super fun environment?
Our position does align with what we're hearing from Dell for when we're dealing with Dell Technologies. So we try and pass on the message as transparently as we can, understanding there is supply constraints coming, and we have to deal with those in the only way we have, and that is to figure out what we need. Let's plan early. Let's plan the budgets we have for the year. And we can make some estimates about what's going to be happening 6 months from now, but they're estimates and they're going to be higher. So it's probably going to be cheaper for you to have technology that's sitting on the floor unused for a few months and waste through some support potentially, as opposed to delaying the purchase for 3 months. So if we know what we're going to buy, we should operate in a manner that allows us to order those technologies as soon as possible and make sure you're not waiting for something that delays your business initiatives.
You guys won the Data Center Solutions Excellence Award last year for Canada. Take your victory lap. Tell me what is it you guys are doing in the data center space that earned that, and what does winning the award tell you about where your practice is focused?
I hope it helps demonstrate our success. So what ESTI likes to do as a business and our business model is really to build highly competent experts, all the way from solution architecture to implementation of those technologies at the customer site. That takes a lot of effort on our behalf. And so it's nice to get a reward that says we're doing the right things. Because if you can build a strong rapport with a client who trusts your experts in their field, that creates long-term relationships, which is what both ESTI and Dell are after and what our clients want.
You're a storage specialist at a conference that has been at its core all about AI infrastructure. But at the same time, you go back to when it was, you said EMC World, all about storage. The more I heard this week, the more it feels like the AI story is really a data story. And data stories are storage stories to at least some degree. How are you seeing that translate in terms of, what your customers are actually asking about or what they're going to be asking you about?
Oh, it's significant. You're right. In order for any type of artificial intelligence to derive a useful data product out the end, it's built on the data that you have. So customers are coming to the realization that they have to store everything. So it is driving a lot of demand for storage. It's driving storage in different ways, and they just keep everything. And then there's another product that comes after that, which is cleaning that data and building the data pipelines. Like it's when I talk about storage, it's really about data, and AI is a data-driven product. So it's doing great things for the storage industry, but the clients understand that they do have to have the data. It has to be there. It has to be available. And then when they build these data products, they have to protect those data products. They got to make sure they're secure. So it's driving a lot of initiatives on both sides of the fence that are good for all of us.
Especially with new or newer customers or customers who are looking to expand what they're doing with AI, and acknowledging there's going to be a range from folks who have had the religion since day one and folks who've just been randomly shoving stuff digitally wherever they can. Where do you find those new customers are at, generally speaking, level set in terms of sophistication of data management and data governance and all that kind of fun?
Unfortunately, I'd like to say there's a median there. There is not. Everybody is at a different stage in that sort of cycle for them. So you really have to be a little bit cognizant and ask the questions to find out where they're at before you can really sort of hold their hands and walk them down the road. So, many people, if that started that journey early, you can learn from them. And so they're going to tell us to start and do something. And you may fail. There may be some things, but you're going to learn something from that. The second time will be more successful. So then you take that information, you pass it on to the newer people who are trying to get, quick value from those investments they're making on that AI front. So it could be things about how to connect those various data sources because they're spread everywhere to, how do they build or select which ones they put their money and their efforts behind, right? And so you take from the ones that have been doing this for a while, you pass that information on to the ones that are starting to do this journey, and you connect the dots, right? So you provide value and make pain go away wherever you can. And customers appreciate that. And so does Dell. They've been doing a great job there.
And that sounds like that's where you're kind of bridging that gap that exists and trying to bring customers to the level they need to be at to get something out of this.
Absolutely. I think, like I said, everybody's on a journey and a different stage of that journey. And so you have to communicate well to understand where they're at and what they're trying to achieve. Once you know that, we don't always have the answers, but we leverage great partners like Dell who they do have somebody that knows the answer. And so building this sort of ecosphere of potential partners to bridge that gap is great. And Dell does that not just from us and the partner community, but their partner community as well, to support all the component pieces that go together to build these pretty highly complex solutions in some cases.
Of all the announcements, of all the stuff that we heard on the main stage and elsewhere this week, what kind of caught your ear, made you look up, think, oh, that's going to be interesting, going back to your business or going back to your customers with new opportunities or the ability to do something better, faster, more?
So as we talked about, I am a storage guy, so I look at something like Exascale. They've been talking about this for a couple of years now in the CTO cycles that I've been to see that product sort of come to fruition where you have something and you can just put a personality on that module and build something out. I think that could be very game changing in the sense of, especially for AI, they might want to do a lot of things with file storage today, object storage tomorrow, being able to build up a cluster and put a personality on it that meets the needs of the day. I think that could be quite interesting. That rack scale solution you saw on the stage with Michael Dell and Jensen the other day on the right side for the larger clients, something like that could be quite interesting. I mean, we're building these large data centers right now and trying to fill them. Rack scale sort of infrastructure that helps power and energy and doing a lot of powerful things is going to probably be a game changer for a lot of people.
One of the things that struck me here is kind of the, I want to call it the AI agnosticism, as long as you're doing it on Dell infrastructure, that Dell is talking about here, ranging from, if you've got really basic needs, run it locally on your AI PC, Moving up a bit, there's I think it's the GB10 unit, which it's more a desk side machine, up to the big old box that Jensen signed on stage. How does that map with kind of what you see in terms of customer needs for AI, and what do you think of that kind of approach to structuring both the data center and broader AI processing across the enterprise?
I think as we touched on earlier, everybody's on a different stage in that journey. So if you got a guy that's working at his desk and he's trying to do some cool things, but he doesn't have access to 1 million tokens, that little GB10 you put on the desk beside him, and he's going to do some development. He's going to learn some wonderful things. And then as you move up the stack and in your journey, you got some big clients. You're going to do small sort of proof of concept type scenarios where they might want a smaller box and then move up that stack. I think it's important to have a product that covers a diverse range of those people, because nobody's in that one sweet spot, right? They're all over the map. And so having that full technology set supports wherever they happen to be in their life cycle. So
you touch on tokens, and Jeff Clark's presentation was really deep into tokenomics and the kind of the trap there. I'm curious how that maps with what you've seen in customers as they've started to explore AI. Are they seeing these same challenges, and how are they addressing? How are they thinking about it?
Yeah, so I mean, tokens are the buzzword of the day, but they're out of that for a reason, right? Everybody has finite resources to put towards the solution they're trying to build. They may or may not know what that solution is. They're working towards something. They need tokens to achieve that. So what I find is interesting is the people who are very early into the game of AI and building solutions around that, it doesn't take them long before they're like, I'm out of tokens. I need to do some stuff, right? So it just comes back to the fact that there's only so many resources to solve the needs you have, and you only have so many tokens, and you got to learn to live in what you can get your hands on, I guess, right? And so that's driving the economy, whether it's at a data center level or at an internal level for any business, right?
And does that in turn then drive, which I believe is Dell's thesis here, does that in turn drive the interest in building out infrastructure in-house so that the relative incremental cost of those additional tokens goes way down because it's bought and built versus rented kind of?
Yeah, I think there's a step along that AI journey where people have potentially outgrown what they can do in a cloud in an economic fashion. We see the supply constraints are driven by CPU and memory usage. If you look at what the cloud hyperscalers offer, when you get into highly intensive memory and CPU, it starts to get very expensive. A lot of storage, a lot of bits and bytes moving back and forth, very expensive. All those things are prevalent in AI. You're moving a lot of data back and forth. You're touching a lot of things. You need a lot of memory at times. So once you get to a point where you're doing useful things with your AI building agentic models, doesn't matter what you do in inferencing, it starts to get really expensive. So then it becomes a time where you can move those things into a data center you control. You can get some economics from it, and you can get some sovereignty out of it. A hyperscaler outside of your control can turn things off. They can't do that when it's your data center. So you got a lot of control as well as the economics behind how you're achieving the outcomes you're looking to achieve.
I used a word which is actually where I wanted to go next, which is just sovereignty. Because I'm curious, when we're talking about data center infrastructure and moving bits around and just enterprise storage, how is data sovereignty trending among your customers, especially folks who have regulatory concerns and that sort of thing?
I will say that being a Canadian company, predominantly, we have a larger focus on sovereignty and data sovereignty and sovereign solutions than maybe will be south of the border here. And we find our friends in European Union are a little bit different. They're ahead of us even, but it's a really big concern, especially when you have any type of government agency that you're dealing with, or anybody that really has intellectual property that they're looking to protect. They've learned that OpenAI models may expose things, even if it's just from, how they're creating their algorithms. But if the data gets out there, it's a concern. They're protecting their assets as well. These AIs are delivering very useful outcomes for them. They need to make sure they own those outcomes and that they can actually reach them when they need them. And so part of the data sovereignty is not just the sovereign part of your data, but it's the actual access to your data now. And we're learning things from not just the AI piece, but from ransomware. All of a sudden your data goes away. The same thing could happen in a hyperscaler for some people. So that sovereign IT solutions are going to be, I think, increasingly important moving forward.
On that note, you mentioned ransomware and data resilience and protection is another area I wanted to touch on. To that point, exactly, we heard the figure that 97% of cyber attacks are now specifically targeting backup infrastructure because if the old line about I forget the particular bank robber's name, but why do you rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you go after the backup? Because that's where all the data is. Does that kind of match with what you're seeing? And if so, how does that kind of change how you're designing and recommending data protection for your customers?
It is absolutely changing people's realization of how they need to protect their data. It doesn't matter. This one doesn't matter if it's AI or your regular business practices. Your data has value, whether it's to support applications that are running your critical viable business, or you're building AI products that you need to protect. That has value, and you need to access it. And so, what we're seeing more and more, and we've built a really strong practice around this, is building things like cyber vaults and using Dell's technology partners like index engines, where they come in and they can quickly identify threats inside your environment and act on those, because these guys loiter around for potentially months at a time, right? And you're right, they know how to get to your backups. They know they're not getting paid if these guys can recover. So they're going to do everything they can to try and disrupt that. And they have AI engines that are just like ours, but they have a lot of access to a lot of money, and they don't have the constraints about how they use their AI in a general way. I mean, these people are criminals. So they act in a method that makes them money. And so we're going to be facing even more potential threats in the future. And some of those are going to be AI driven. We're going to have to react at AI speeds. So I think there's changes coming, but certainly people are learning to build protection mechanisms that are air gapped and can respond very quickly to threats.
When you're sitting in front of a client who thinks they're covered, they've got a backup solution, they've got someone who's responsible for it. What are the most common gaps that you find in what they think they have versus what they actually have?
I think for many clients, they don't really understand how disruptive it's going to be if they come into a ransomware attack. If you're a client that may have ransomware insurance, for example, and they get hit with a client, and you have to tell them, oh, do you understand you're not going to be able to touch any of that infrastructure because your insurance company is going to want you to do some analysis on that to see how the threat came in. Like that infrastructure is dead and gone. You're starting from scratch now. You need a golden image. You need something somebody hasn't touched. So protecting the data is only the first piece. Rebuilding from that data and how fast you can do that, that's the very critical component. And so that's where you have an air gap cyber solution like Dell delivers is critical, because you can understand what data to recover, and you can recover quickly. Having the data there, that's the great first step, and that's where you should start. But following that is only the first step.
Your client base is different from a lot of partners I talk to, given where you sit and who you're focused on. Not necessarily organizations that are under the same kind of pressure or have the same kind of resources to pursue AI. How do you kind of translate, filter what you hear at a conference like this, where a lot is focused towards big enterprise that has a lot of resources to throw at this and a lot of imperative to do it, to a message that makes sense for them and scales to what their needs and their appetites are?
That's one I think isn't really that difficult. It's not as difficult as you would think, because everybody has the same problems. They run into the same problems. How they build solutions to those problems might change on the scale, but you just have to kind of understand and recognize that everybody's having the same problems. You can articulate and communicate to them that you're not the only one that has this. We can resolve this problem at a large scale, but we don't have to, right? It came back to earlier when we talked about the product sets and they have to start from the small to a large. You just pick the right one to meet the solution that these guys have. And so how you solve that problem of the day, it doesn't necessarily change for a really, really large client versus a very, very small client. It's really just the scale of the end solution, the architecture that's put together to solve the need.
From a Titanium Partners seat, what did the program changes that we saw rolled out, the agentification of the program, some of the incentive shifts, that kind of thing, tell you about where Dell sees growth opportunity, and how does it kind of align with where you're already going or where it might take you?
So I think you can see very, very easily that Dell is putting a large focus around AI and what it can do for them to streamline their business and be successful. Us, like any other company we deal with, are doing the same thing. So what they're doing with their Dell One program and having a single sort of all the way from lead generation down to coding and pricing and follow up, it matches kind of what we're doing in the back end and trying to automate that. Because as long as we can automate that process and reduce the friction, in those programs and dealing with Dell, we can spend that time focusing on our clients' needs. And you see Dell, I think, leveraging the same technologies to do that. And if we're smart business people today, we're looking to the people around us who are being successful and trying to do what they're doing in a sense, right? And that's true for us and our clients. So leveraging AI and seeing how that's being successful for our partners is driving what we're all doing to drive automation and that simplification through the processes that just are painful every day that we have to do better at, right? To support our clients.
I'm guessing you guys are pretty far down this road already because you're pretty much a pure play Dell house on the infrastructure side, as far as I understand. But when a company like Dell rolls out these incentives that are focused on, expanding customer base footprints, if you're a Dell storage customer trying to get them into Dell PCs, or Dell, any of the other solution lines for that matter. Just curious if that kind of moves the needle for you in terms of the incentive that's provided there, or is it kind of already baked into what you're doing?
It's kind of baked into what we're doing. I mean, in the end of the day, you are trying to build a rapport with customer based on being a trusted expert. So you can't, you're not going to flip up your technologies around based on what's going to get somebody a little bit more money or something like that. You got to do the right thing for the customer today and every time you deal with them. The advantage of dealing with Dell is they typically tie their incentives to the product that they are investing in today, that they see the future growing into. So they usually coincide. I mean, they understand the pain points of the year and they're not putting incentives on those things because that's what they want to sell. I mean, they do want to sell those things, but they usually match the requirements of the day as well. So they're really good at that. And then they usually have a lot of tools to support that initiative of IT transformation, whatever it is, for that time and place in our lives.
Mentioned earlier, you're on the CTO Connect program, pretty small room, exclusive group. Tell me about what that relationship looks like on the inside of the room and kind of the value that an organization like ESTI gets from sitting in there.
I guess I'll put it this way. We deal with some other technology providers, like you said, predominantly Dell. Dell puts us in a room. They tell us what they're doing for the next year or two, and they ask us if they're on the right track. That's telling to me, right? They care and they listen. So they talk about the technologies that we're going to see up and coming. So it's helpful for us to talk to our clients about where the industry is headed and stuff like that. But they do sometimes say, we're going to do this. And the room sends up and says, no, you can't do that. Our customers love this, or, we like this for this reason. They said, oh, okay. And we have a dialogue about those things. So I think that's one of the most important things that comes out of the CTO Connect is that we hear about industry trends, but they also ask us our opinion if they're on the right track. And then they listen to that opinion, right? So I think that's telling for any company you deal with that engages not only with their clients, but their technology partners to feel if they agree that they're all on the right track. So it's one of the things I really like about the CTO Council. It's very good.
You guys just turned 35 or so, as I understand, as an organization. That's a long time to be running a consultancy in any market, and, markets move, vendors come and go. What's kind of the philosophy behind building something that durable in a market that changes so fast, and especially in a area of the country that doesn't necessarily get as much headline attention from the vendors as does a Toronto or a Vancouver or Montreal?
I think it comes back to what I stated earlier around building strong and capable expertise across the board. And that's building relationships with clients, building relationships with our partners like Dell to solve the solutions of the day. And our clients respect that because they know they can come back to us again and again, and we'll do the right thing together. So that's really the crux of it. I mean, our business model is a little different, where we support a little bit more of an entrepreneurial aspect to our business. So when young, capable people come on board and they build differentiating products, they get a seat at the table. And so that's critical for ESTI and the way we operate. But it's really looking at modern technology solutions and being agile to support those ever-changing technologies. It makes our industry exciting. You're never doing the same thing every day. And as long as you can recognize the fact that you won't be doing the same thing tomorrow, and you just have to find a way to deal with it, that's how we thrive in our company, and with working with Dell as well.
All right, so let's close with asking you to do a little bit of the impossible. Then, given that pace of change, what's one thing that you're thinking about today, but maybe not totally all in on at this point, that you think is going to be kind of shaping the business for ESTI and your customers when we're sitting here at DTW 2027?
Well, that's a really hard question. So it's On the investment cycle, we do look at some of the technologies today. And as we talked about, AI is big for us. We need to build services that our clients don't have. So what we do is we spend a lot of focus on where they have skills, where they don't. So, we're going to build a lot of expertise around, cleaning those data, building data pipelines, and that kind of stuff to focus on the need of our clients are asking us to help them solve. So that's kind of an easy one because everybody sees that. Going forward, I don't know. We're making a strong effort in Saskatchewan and Alberta to build a sort of a data center economy to support a lot of these data centers that need to be built. We have ready access to power and infrastructure to support those things. So that's going to be something that may drive a little bit of a change in our operating model, just to support our local governments as they try and sort of take advantage of the situations and the differentiators we have. So that'll drive some change, I think, in ESTI. And then just as we expand across the rest of Canada, different geographies have different requirements as well. So lots of change, lots of new people coming on board all the time. And that's a interesting but dynamic scenario that you have to deal with.
That will be an interesting thread to pull. And I remember going to an event, oh God, it must have been 15 years ago now, talking about, Canada really should be a data center powerhouse when you consider we have power and clean power in relative abundance. We have cold, which is important, it turns out. It sounds like maybe there's an opportunity to realize some of that with what you guys are doing and with what the governments are starting to look at more seriously.
They are. So right outside my hometown, they just announced a very large data center, which is going to house some stuff from CoreWeave. And we're going to see more of that, I think, because that process went very well. So I sat in on a conference a couple of weeks ago where it was the government industry getting together to talk about why they were successful, what are the things that they have to the table. So Saskatchewan's unique because they have regulated power, energy, land. So, they can guarantee that we will give you power. We can guarantee you'll get LNG. So those types of things are very important for anybody trying to build a data center. It is the critical piece, right? And so with the government having control over all these, they can guarantee those. That's where I think Saskatchewan is going to have a differentiator to support that technology. And the government's well aware of that fact now. So they're going to want to do more of these things. And then our neighbors in both Alberta and Manitoba are sort of on board as well. And certainly Alberta's done a few key data center there to support AI, and those are going to continue to happen. So it should be, we're sometimes slow to move because it's government. But once they realize the differentiators they have and what it can do for the market, then I think there'll be some traction there.
Should be interesting times, and sitting where you're sitting, it sounds like a big opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a big opportunity for all of us. So supporting your community around you as well as building a thriving business.
Earl, I appreciate your taking the time once again. I hope this has been a good DTW for you.
It's been a great discussion and a good DTW. So thanks a lot for having me.
There you have it. Earl Gosick from ESTI Consulting Services. I'd like to thank Earl for his time last week in Las Vegas. 35 years building deep technical expertise from Saskatoon in a vendor relationship game that tends to reward proximity to the bigger centers. That's not an accident, and it came through in the conversation. A few things I'd like to take away from this one. First, the AI is a storage story framing. Every AI product ultimately requires data to be collected, governed, moved, protected. That's not news to Earl, but it's a useful reframe for anyone still trying to connect their existing practice to the AI conversation. The hardware gets the headlines, the data work actually gets the contracts. Second, on cyber resilience, the ransomware insurance point Earl raised is worth sitting with. The moment a client files a claim, that infrastructure gets frozen while the insurance company figures out how the breach happened. Your ability to recover doesn't just depend on whether the backup is intact, it depends on whether you built a clean, air-gapped, golden image that nobody has touched. That's the conversation. And if you're not having it with your clients, maybe someone else is. And third, keep an eye on Saskatchewan. Regulated power, guaranteed energy supply, and a provincial government that has now seen a CoreWeaver-scale data center get successfully built in the province and wants more of them. Earl thinks that's just the start of something, and I'm inclined to agree. If you're enjoying the show, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, most of the usual podcast directories. And if you have a moment to leave a rating or review, that really does help folks in the channel find the show. Till next time, I'm Robert Dutt for channelbuzz.ca, and I'll see you in the channel.